Hey everybody, welcome back to Bible Fun with the Dunns. Today we're finishing up the book of Esther with chapter number 10. Now listen, I know that you're so tired from reading today. I know that your eyes are barely even open because, after all, those 3 verses were a lot to read today, right?
So much.
So like you read an entire chapter of the Bible. We're so proud of you. It was a huge commitment of your day, right? It was so short. You know, a lot of times we think that when we read our Bible, we think that it's all about the quantity of how much we read that matters. Like I read a chapter, I read a book, or I read 4 hours today. Well, look, I can tell you this. I think that there are a lot of people we could find who get deep meaning out of just one favorite verse of the Bible. And we can look, there are entire Psalms that are about that long. It's not the quantity we read, it's the quality. Remember, the goal is not to check off, oh yeah, I finished today and I did it fast. The goal is to say, I sat with the Father today. So chapter number 10 is short, but hey, it's still scripture. Jax, give us a quick recap of this.
Okay, so it starts off talking about the king and how he puts a tax in the land, and that's kind of reminding us how the king is still there. But then, for the rest of the chapter, for that whole time, they're talking about how Mordecai, his legacy throughout the rest of history.
That's right. All right, so you got 2 characters here. You got the king mentioned in verse number 1, and then the last 2 verses are really about Mordecai, God positioning his people in places of influence. Now, this is going to be important because as this goes out, remember, God's role in this wasn't just to deliver his people from Haman. God's role is to deliver his people. And then he's going to send his people back into Israel. And once back in Israel, he continues the line of his people in their homeland for the purpose of bringing about the Messiah in the world. So all of this is feeding into God's plans. Now, I want to go back to what is God's plan. Think about how God has worked throughout the Bible. Because in verse number 2, it says this about Mordecai. It says, now all the acts of his power and his might and the account of the greatness of Mordecai, to which the king advanced him, are they not written in the book of the chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai the Jew was second to King Ahasuerus, and was great among the Jews, and was well received by the multitude of his brethren. Hey, let me ask you this. Let's have quiz time. Can you think of anybody else in the Old Testament who started out somewhere outside of home, who was in a position of almost, there it is, in a position of slavery and service, but then brought out, set up as the second most powerful ruler, and then received by his brothers? That's who?
Joseph.
Okay, now listen. Joseph is not the only one. Can you think of anybody else who was taken from their homeland, put in a place, had to learn a language, brought out, set him, becomes the second most powerful ruler in the land?
Moses.
Okay, Moses was brought out. He was a Jew, and he's set him, raised as Pharaoh's son. What about Daniel?
Yes.
Okay, look, do you see how all of these stories are real? God is at work in all of these stories. Here's what I like about this, is that not only can we find connections to other stories in the Bible, we can also see larger connections to Jesus. Think about it like this. Jesus is our deliverer, okay? So what is Jesus' connection to Haman? How did Haman die?
Haman was hanged.
Haman was hanged, all right? So what was he hanged from?
A noose?
Well, no, it was like a wooden pole. So he's hung on a wooden pole, all right?
Almost like a crucifixion.
Almost like a crucifixion. It wasn't a crucifixion, but he's hung on a tree or a pole, okay? So Jesus died on our cross. Haman died on the pole that he had built for who?
Mordecai.
So he built it for somebody else, but he died on it. Our cross was built for us, but Jesus died on it. All right, so you see that? What about like Esther? Okay, so who knew who Esther's parents were at the beginning of the story?
Mordecai.
Okay, who else?
No one.
Nobody. All right. So Jesus in the New Testament, who all knew who Jesus' daddy was?
Mary and Joseph.
And who else?
Jesus. Oh,
But
everybody.
no, nobody else knew. Like they said, well, who is this? Don't we know his father and his mother? Aren't his brothers and sisters around here? So like they had to come to terms with the fact that Jesus is the Son of God. So his parentage was kind of a mystery until it was all revealed. Well, then like Mordecai. Mordecai is raised up and he is next to the king, second most powerful. Where did Jesus go when he ascended?
Next to the Father.
To the right hand of the Father. Look, Jesus all over this thing right here. Okay, so Brian Gregory said this years ago. Here's what I like, and he summed it up like this. He said, in the Jewish calendar, the year begins and ends with the month of March. So like our calendar goes from January to December. Theirs begins like at near the beginning of March and then ends at the end of March, or begins at the end and ends at the beginning of March. I know it's weird, but it cycles back around, and March is the beginning month. All right? It begins with a celebration. The first celebration is Passover, and it ends with the celebration of Purim. So it begins with a celebration of how God delivered his people from the oppression of Pharaoh in a foreign land, and it ends with a celebration of how God delivered his people from the oppression of Haman in a foreign land. So from deliverance to deliverance, that's how their whole calendar sets up. I like that. This whole story of Esther reminds me of a hymn that my daddy sang. My daddy is a music leader, waves his hand, leads the music. He's great at it. And this is a hymn we used to sing. It's super, super old. It's called This Is My Father's World. Listen. This is my Father's world, oh let me ne'er forget, that though the wrong seems often so strong, God is ruler yet. This is my Father's world, his battle is never done. Jesus who died shall be satisfied, and the earth and heaven be one. So, when it looks like you're reading Esther and it looks like, man, this is a bad story, or you're living your life and it goes, it's a bad day, remember this always. This is my Father's world, and he is very much in control. Tomorrow we're going to study the book of Nehemiah. Let's get to it. It's going to be good, about the same kind of time period, about the same kind of place. So we're going to jump into Nehemiah. We'll see you then. Bye.
Bye.